Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. You ready for this? Sue called out, not looking up from her monitor. Jim swallowed hard. As ready as I'll ever be, I guess. The door swung open and Pete strode in, a grin plastered across his face. All right, team. Big day today. Let's make some magic happen. Jim and Sue exchanged glances. Pete's enthusiasm was infectious, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. They'd been working on this project for months, pouring their hearts and souls into creating a game that could put their small company on the map. But Pete's latest idea? Well, that was something else entirely. Conference room in 5, Pete announced, clapping his hands together. Time to talk strategy. As Pete disappeared down the hallway, Jim let out a long, shaky breath. Sue wheeled her chair over to him, concern etched on her face. You okay? Jim ran a hand through his hair. I don't know, Sue. This whole thing, it's insane, right? I mean, what Pete's suggesting. Sue placed a comforting hand on his arm. It's a lot, I know. But think about the potential. This could be huge for us. Jim nodded, unconvinced. He'd spent years building up this company, working tirelessly to create games that people loved. And now everything could change in an instant, all because of a secret he'd kept hidden for so long. The conference room felt smaller than usual as Jim and Sue took their seats. Pete was already there, pacing back and forth, practically vibrating with excitement. As soon as they were settled, he launched into his pitch. Okay, so we've all been thinking about how to really make a splash with this new game, right? How to stand out in a crowded market? Pete's eyes gleamed. Well, I think I've cracked it. Jim, this is where you come in. Jim's stomach clenched. He knew what was coming, but hearing it out loud still felt surreal. Pete continued. We've got a unique opportunity here. Jim, your other identity, it's perfect. Think about it. A game company led by a transgender woman. The press would eat it up. We'd be breaking new ground, making headlines. It's exactly the kind of publicity we need. Sue spoke up, her voice cautious. Pete, I know we've discussed this, but are you sure? It's a big ask. Jim's privacy... I know. Pete waved his hand dismissively. But Jim, buddy, think about it. You've been living this double life for years. Wouldn't it be liberating to finally be open about who you are? And the timing couldn't be better. We launch the game, introduce the world to Jill, and boom, instant success. Jim felt like he was underwater, Pete's words muffled and distant. He'd spent so long keeping Jill a secret, only allowing himself to embrace that side of himself in the safety of his own home. The thought of going public, of letting the whole world see that part of him, it was terrifying. I don't know, Jim stammered. It's not that simple. There's a lot to consider. Sue leaned forward, her eyes locked on Jim. No one's going to force you into anything, Jim. This is your decision. We can find another way to market the game if we need to. Pete's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, but he pressed on. Of course. I'm not trying to pressure you, Jim. I just think this could be amazing for all of us. For you, personally, and for the company. But you're right. It's your call. Jim closed his eyes, his mind racing. He thought about all the nights he'd spent as Jill, feeling free and authentic in a way he never did as Jim. He thought about the fear that had kept him from sharing that part of himself with the world. And he thought about the company, about Sue and Pete and all the work they'd put into this project. When he opened his eyes, he saw Sue and Pete watching him expectantly. He took a deep breath. Okay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Let's do it. The room erupted in a flurry of activity. Pete whooped, pumping his fist in the air. Sue's eyes widened in surprise, a mix of concern and excitement on her face. And Jim felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to take a leap into the unknown. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Now Jill found herself thrust into a crash course on living full-time as a woman. Sue became her constant companion and support. helping with everything from makeup tutorials to voice training. No, like this, Sue demonstrated, applying eyeshadow with a deft hand. You want to blend it out, see? Creates a softer look. Jill watched intently, trying to mimic Sue's movements. It was strange seeing her reflection in the mirror. The face looking back at her was both familiar and foreign. It was her, but not her. Not yet. I feel ridiculous, Jill muttered, smudging the eyeshadow for the third time. Sue smiled encouragingly. You're doing great. This stuff takes practice, trust me. You should have seen me when I first started wearing makeup. I looked like a clown who'd been in a bar fight. That drew a laugh from Jill, easing some of the tension. Thanks, Sue. I don't know what I'd do without you. Hey, what are friends for? Besides, I always wanted a sister to share makeup tips with. As the days passed, Jill found herself slowly becoming more comfortable in her new skin. The initial awkwardness of wearing dresses and heels began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of confidence. She practiced her walk, her talk, her mannerisms, all under the watchful eye of Sue and a team of professionals Pete had hired to help with the transition. One particularly challenging day found Jill in a voice training session, struggling to maintain a higher pitch without straining her vocal cords. Remember, it's not just about pitch, the coach explained patiently. It's about resonance, intonation, speech patterns. Women tend to use more varied tones when they speak. Jill nodded, frustration evident on her face. I know, it's just... It feels so unnatural. That's normal. It takes time for your brain to adjust to new speech patterns. Let's try again. As Jill worked on her voice, Pete was busy laying the groundwork for their big reveal. He coordinated with PR firms, set up interviews, and worked tirelessly to ensure that when they launched, the world would be watching. We're going to change the face of the gaming industry, Pete declared during one of their strategy meetings. A transgender woman leading a major game launch? It's unprecedented. Jill shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I'm not sure how I feel about being a poster child? Pete's expression softened. I know it's a lot, Jill, but think about the impact you could have, the people you could inspire. This isn't just about selling games anymore. It's about representation, about showing the world that everyone has a place in this industry. Sue chimed in. He's right, Jill, but remember, you're in control here. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, we pull the plug. No questions asked. Jill nodded, grateful for Sue's unwavering support. As intimidating as this whole process was, having her best friend by her side made it bearable. The days ticked by, each one bringing Jill closer to her public debut. She worked with stylists to develop her new look, spent hours with PR coaches practicing interview techniques, and even underwent sessions with a therapist to help her navigate the emotional complexities of her transition. How are you feeling about all of this? The therapist asked during one of their sessions. Jill sighed, sinking into the plush couch. Overwhelmed, mostly. Excited, but terrified. I keep wondering if I'm doing the right thing. The therapist nodded understandingly. That's completely normal. You're undertaking a massive life change and doing it in a very public way. It's natural to have doubts. I've spent so long hiding this part of myself. The idea of suddenly being so open, so visible. It's scary. Of course it is. But remember, you're not alone in this. You have a support system, people who care about you and want to see you succeed. And ultimately, you're embracing your true self. That takes tremendous courage. Jill let those words sink in. Courage. Was that what this was? It often felt more like fear, like she was being swept along by forces beyond her control. But maybe there was courage in facing that fear, in stepping into the unknown. As the launch date approached, the tension in the office reached fever pitch. Everyone was working around the clock, putting the finishing touches on the game and preparing for the big reveal. Jill found herself at the center of it all, a whirlwind of fittings, rehearsals, and last-minute preparations. The night before the launch, Jill stood in front of her bedroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. Her hair, now longer and styled in soft waves, framed a face expertly made up to enhance her features. The dress she wore, a sleek royal blue number, hugged curves she never knew she had. Sue appeared in the doorway, a smile on her face. "You look amazing, Jill." Jill turned, anxiety written across her features. "Do I? I feel like a fraud, like everyone's going to see right through me." Sue crossed the room, placing her hands on Jill's shoulders. "Listen to me. You are not a fraud. You are Jill, and you are beautiful, inside and out. Tomorrow, you're going to go out there and show the world who you really are, and they're going to love you." Tears welled up in Jill's eyes, threatening to ruin her carefully applied mascara. What if they don't? What if this whole thing backfires? Then we deal with it together. But that's not going to happen. You've got this, Jill. We've got this. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if the universe itself was smiling on their endeavor. The launch event was being held at a swanky hotel in the heart of the city, and as their car pulled up to the entrance, Jill felt her heart racing. Pete met them at the door, practically bouncing with excitement. "This is it, team! Our moment of truth! Jill, you ready to make history?" Jill took a deep breath, smoothing down her dress. "As ready as I'll ever be." The next few hours passed in a blur. There were interviews, photo ops, demonstrations of the game. Jill found herself in the spotlight, fielding questions about both the game and her personal journey. To her surprise, she handled it with a grace and poise she didn't know she possessed. "So, Jill," one reporter asked, "what made you decide to come out publicly as a transgender woman at the same time as launching this game?" Jill paused, considering her words carefully. "It wasn't an easy decision. I've spent a long time hiding this part of myself, but I realized that by being open and honest about who I am, I could potentially help others who might be struggling with their own identity. And in the gaming world, which hasn't always been the most inclusive industry, I hoped to show that there's room for everyone at the table." The response was overwhelmingly positive. Social media exploded with support. Gaming forums buzzed with excitement about both the game and its groundbreaking creator. By the end of the day, it was clear that their gamble had paid off. As the event wound down, Jill found a quiet moment to herself, slipping away from the crowds to catch her breath. She stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the cool evening air a welcome relief after the heat of the spotlight. Sue joined her, handing her a glass of champagne. "To Jill," she said, raising her own glass, "and to new beginnings." Jill clinked her glass against Sue's, a smile playing on her lips. "To new beginnings?" she echoed. As they stood there, watching the sun set over the city skyline, Jill felt a sense of peace wash over her. For the first time in her life, she felt truly, completely herself. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but in this moment, everything felt right. The weeks following the launch were a whirlwind of activity. The game was a runaway success, praised for its innovative gameplay and stunning graphics. But it was Jill who captured the public's imagination. She became an overnight sensation, hailed as a trailblazer in the gaming industry and the transgender community alike. Interviews requests poured in from major networks and publications. Jill found herself on talk shows, in magazine spreads, even giving a TED Talk about her experiences. It was overwhelming at times, but with Sue and Pete by her side, she navigated the newfound fame with growing confidence. One particularly memorable moment came during a live television interview. The host, a well-known figure in the gaming world, leaned forward with a probing look. "Jill, there are some who have accused you and your company of using your transgender identity as a marketing ploy. How do you respond to that?" Jill felt a moment of panic, but took a deep breath, remembering her media training. "I understand why some people might think that," she began, her voice steady. "But my journey to accepting and embracing my true self began long before we ever considered going public. Yes, the timing of my coming out coincided with our game launch, but that was a personal decision I made after a lot of soul-searching. My identity is not a marketing strategy. It's who I am." The host nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. And how has this affected your work in game development? Jill smiled, feeling more at ease. In many ways, it's made me a better developer. Understanding and embracing all aspects of myself has given me a new perspective on creating diverse, inclusive gaming experiences. We're committed to making games that reflect the rich tapestry of our player base. As the interview wrapped up, Jill felt a surge of pride. She was no longer just talking about code and gameplay mechanics. She was advocating for real change in an industry she loved. Back at the office, the atmosphere had shifted. What was once a small, scrappy startup now felt like a company on the rise. New hires were brought in to handle the increased workload, and talks of expansion were constantly in the air. Pete was in his element, wheeling and dealing with investors and partners. "We're not just making games anymore," he declared during one team meeting. "We're building a brand, a movement." Jill and Sue exchanged glances. It was exciting, but also a little scary. Everything was moving so fast. "Speaking of movements," Pete continued, "Jill, we've been approached about you headlining a major LGBT gaming convention next month. What do you think?" Jill blinked, taken aback. "Me? Headlining? I'm not sure I'm qualified for that." Sue chimed in. "Are you kidding? You're exactly what they're looking for. A successful game developer who's also an out and proud trans woman. You're an inspiration, Jill." The word inspiration still felt strange to Jill. She was just living her life, trying to navigate this new reality. But she couldn't deny the impact she was having. The letters and messages she received daily from LGBTQ gamers and aspiring developers were testament to that. "Okay," Jill said finally. "I'll do it, but I want to make sure we're using this platform responsibly. It's not just about me or our company, it's about pushing for real change in the industry." Pete grinned. "That's my girl, we'll make it happen." As the convention approached, Jill threw herself into preparation. She worked with LGBTQ advocacy groups to better understand the issues facing the community in the gaming world. She pored over statistics, personal stories, and industry reports. This wasn't just another PR opportunity. It was a chance to make a real difference. The day of the convention arrived, and Jill found herself standing backstage, heart pounding. The auditorium was packed, a sea of faces waiting to hear what she had to say. Sue gave her hand a squeeze. "You've got this," she whispered. Jill took a deep breath and stepped out onto the stage. The applause was deafening. As she looked out at the crowd, she saw faces filled with hope, excitement, and validation. In that moment, she knew that every challenge, every moment of doubt, had been worth it. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice strong and clear. "My name is Jill, and I'm here to talk about the future of gaming. A future where everyone, regardless of gender identity, race, or background, has a place at the table. A future where the games we play reflect the diverse, beautiful world we live in." As she spoke, Jill felt a sense of purpose wash over her. This was why she had taken this leap, not for fame or fortune, but for the chance to make a difference. To show others like her that they belonged, that their stories mattered. The speech was a resounding success. As Jill left the stage to thunderous applause, she was mobbed by well-wishers and fellow developers eager to collaborate. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Later that night, as Jill, Sue, and Pete celebrated in their hotel room, the reality of how far they'd come truly sank in. "To think," Jill mused, sipping her champagne. "A few months ago, I was terrified of anyone finding out about this part of me. And now? And now you're changing the world," Sue finished, raising her glass. "I'm so proud of you, Jill." Pete nodded in agreement. "We all are, and this is just the beginning. The sky's the limit for us now." As the night wore on and the conversation flowed, Jill found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The fears she'd overcome, the challenges she'd faced, the friendship and support that had carried her through. She thought about the young LGBTQ+ gamers who might see themselves represented in games for the first time because of the work they were doing. It wasn't always easy. There were still days when the pressure felt overwhelming, when the spotlight seemed too bright. But in moments like this, surrounded by friends and filled with a sense of purpose, Jill knew she had made the right choice. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities. There would be new games to develop, new barriers to break, new stories to tell. And Jill was ready for all of it. As the first light of dawn began to peek through the hotel room curtains, Jill raised her glass one last time. "To new beginnings," she said, echoing the toast from that first night after the launch. "And to being true to ourselves, no matter where that leads us." Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.